Hello, welcome to my Deadlock series. This week I made music for the game. I made 2 tracks for the first area of the game, one for exploration and another for combat. I also made a system to mix those 2 tracks smoothly. Then I made some tilesets to upgrade the look of the game, and came up with a name for the game. I also have a temporary logo for it. I will reveal this name at the end of the video. I made a track for the exploration section of the first part of the game. I wanted to create a sense of optimism as this song is for the start of the game, just after the player finds the baby octopus. As I said in a previous episode, I'm using LMMS for creating the music of the game. The idea is to change this song when the player engages in combat. For that, I thought about adding some drums to the track. But first, for handling the music of each level and the transition to the combat music, I needed to create a level manager. This class will be in charge of all specific matters of the level, like which song should it play, the saving progress of the player. For now, I will only code the music part of this class. It will send the information to the audio manager, which is in charge of handling the music, but the level manager will hold the information about which song should the level play. To create a transition between exploration and combat music, I needed to modify the audio manager class a bit. I also made a function to start the music at the level, with a smooth fade-in. As you can see, I can add the exploration and combat songs in Unity's editor. I made some variables to handle the volume of both tracks and the time it takes for the exploration song to fade in. To handle mixing both songs, I had to make 2 public functions that will be called from the level manager. These functions will receive a song, its volume, and the time it takes to fade in. So when the combat music is called, for example, it will use an empty track and start the song at 0 volume. Then, the code calculates how much volume is needed per frame to increase the volume in the time provided. At the same time, the song that's actually playing will fade out at the same rate, creating a smooth transition between the 2 tracks. Here is a preview of the system. I code some debug keys to trigger the combat music by pushing a button. With the mixing working properly, now it was time to code the actual song switching, when the player enters combat. For this, I used the combat manager, that keeps track of how many enemies are engaged in combat with the player. I made a test to see if it was working, but I did something wrong and the music didn't change when the player left the combat. To fix this, I had to create a new function in the combat manager that will be useful for the future. This function will check if there are enemies engaged in combat. If there are not, it will call the level manager to play the exploration music. This confirmation will be made every time an enemy dies. The problem with this approach was that if the player leaves the side of the enemy, he will no longer be engaged, but the combat music will still be playing. But if the player kills the enemy, the music will switch to exploration. So it was a start. What I did to fix this is to check if the combat ended in the enemy AI component. There is a part of the code that checks if the player is in range to start chasing him again. If he can find the player, he will return to an idle state, as he has lost him. That's the best moment to check if there are no more enemies engaged in combat and change the music to exploration. Next, I decided to make a new tileset for the game. I made a template for creating rule tiles. I wasn't happy with the tilesets I made in the last episode, so I created new tilesets for the mountain. Having this template is great, as rule tiles can be tricky, but once you understand them, they are huge time savers. With these tiles, I can create any combination for the mountain ground. And I also made some extra tiles for the edges of the mountain. So I started drawing the level using this new rule tile. As the game starts in the top of the mountain, I imagine this area to be more rocky than full of grass. But later I will make a rule tile for the grass and make the look of this mountain more interesting. I created a new tileset layer that will go behind the rock layer. This will be for the edges of the mountain, to imply height to the scenery. I have set up the sorting order of the tilesets to be behind the rock rule tile. I will need to create another layer of tiles for the grass rule tile, so it will be on top of the rock rule tile and these mountain edges. Using the template I made, it's easier to create new rule tiles. I will probably animate the grass rule tile in the future, but for now I will only use one static frame. Like with the rock rule tile, using these images will allow me to generate any combination of tiles. My workflow to create new rule tiles is simple. First, I import the image to Unity and slice it to separate each tile. This will generate an image for each tile with a number suffix. Then I duplicate a previous rule tile, in this case is the rock 1. To assign the correct image to the correct tile, I only have to check the suffix number. For example, in this case I see that the image corresponds to the suffix 14. I only have to search for the grass image with the suffix 14 and assign it. As the combination of rules for these tiles are always the same, I can use this method and generate new rule tiles easily. With the grass rule tile set up, I only had to paint it in another layer and try to give it an organic range. I wasn't too convinced about the darker grass clusters I made for this rule tile, so I will remove them later. Instead, I placed manually some darker grass, but these tilesets are also temporary. Here was the result. While doing these rule tiles, I asked the community's feedback about the music. Most people liked the transition, but pointed out that the combat music was too happy. So I jumped back into LMMS and started modifying the combat music. It still uses the same bass as the exploration music, but I changed the instruments and notes of the melody to give it a darker tone. I still think it's a bit flat for the combat music of this area, but in my opinion this way sounds better than just adding drums to the exploration music. Here was the result. Do you like it? Leave a comment below. The last thing I did this week was naming the game. I decided that it was time to come up with a name. I wanted something that describes the game in a simple way. So, I present to you Octokeeper. I had other ideas like Octoguardian, Octopus Quest or even something with tentacle. But I think that Octokeeper is a good fit, as it has the two main characters in the name, the octopus and the boy. Also, I think it implies that you have to take care and protect the octopus. I asked for feedback about the name, and most people love it. Others say that maybe the game should be called by something deeper. For example, the main focus of the game is to find a loved one. In the case of the player is his sister, and the baby octopus wants to find its mother. But as the gameplay focuses on taking care of the baby and raising it in different ways, I think Octokeeper is more fitting. What do you think? How would you call the game? So that was my week. I'm glad that I finally got into creating music for the game. Now I have an idea on how it should sound, but I feel like I'm delaying creating the main aspect of the game, taking care of the baby octopus. So I will probably start designing the needs of the baby and creating new art for the octopus. But that will have to wait to next week. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give a like. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for the channel or the game, leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, see you next week.